While F1 keeps selling sprint races as more action, 2025 gave us some truly bizarre scenes: a full race in Spa without a single position change among the top 14, an almost frozen pack in Qatar, and, in that same year, chaos in Melbourne, Interlagos, and Silverstone, with Verstappen starting from the pit lane, Hulkenberg on the podium, and Hamilton spinning in the rain. That's not random. There is a very clear pattern behind which races sent excitement through the roof, and which ones made fans reach for the fast-forward button. The 2025 season leaves a strange feeling, almost like F1 lived in two parallel realities. On one side, races like Silverstone, Australia, Brazil, Bahrain, Mexico. Grand Prix that turned into bar talk, memes, long social media threads. On the other side, Japan, Monaco, and especially some sprints that barely even felt like F1. The question is that just luck, or is there a clear pattern explaining why some races stay in your head and others put you to sleep? This video is going to do exactly that. Pick the 5 best and the 5 worst races of the year and, more importantly, pull out the hidden message inside all of this. Because there is a very direct warning here for the people who decide the rules, the weekend format, and even the way the cars are designed. Let's start on the good side. The version of F1 everybody wants to see. When you put Great Britain, Australia, Brazil, Bahrain, and Mexico on the same shelf, 3 things jump out right away. First, genuine unpredictability. Second, drivers actually able to attack each other on track. Third, strong human stories you still remember months later. Australia is the perfect example of good chaos. The race starts with uncertain weather, the track constantly changing, McLaren looking dominant, and still nobody feels safe. Norris and Piastri making mistakes in treacherous conditions, drivers spinning in the midfield, strategies diverging with every drop of rain. There was tension at the front, serious fights in the middle, and recovery drives at the back. It felt like any wrong tire call, any braking mistake, could totally reshuffle the podium. Notice how it was not a perfect race from a technical standpoint. It was the opposite. There were mistakes, big names spinning, top drivers under pressure. That is exactly what keeps a fan glued to their seat. Bahrain right after that was the example of a modern Grand Prix working really well in dry conditions. Oscar Piastri takes the win. But anyone who watched remembers George Russell holding off Lando Norris even with car problems, remembers Leclerc in full attack dog mode defending with everything he had, remembers several wheel-to-wheel fights in Sakir without DRS turning every move into an automatic pass. Strategy mattered, tire wear mattered, but the driver still made the difference in direct combat. It was the kind of race where you could follow multiple storylines at once without getting lost. And then comes a brutal contrast: Suzuka. Japan, which so many people expect to be a guarantee of a great race, turned into almost a manifesto against what current aerodynamics are becoming. Max Verstappen nails a strong pole in front of an informed McLaren, starts from the front, and from there it is almost a parade. The top 3 stayed relatively close on the stopwatch, but never close enough to really send it into a dive bomb. A fan who was on vacation in Japan chose to stay in Kyoto and watch on TV instead of making the trip to Suzuka. For F1, that comparison is brutal. The layout is the same. What changes? Cars that are hypersensitive to dirty air, extremely dependent on downforce in high-speed corners, and teams running hyper-conservative strategies. It is the perfect recipe for a technical procession. Beautiful for a CFD engineer, frustrating for anyone watching from the couch. Jump a few races on the calendar and you land in Monaco, another live experiment in what does not work. In 2025, someone upstairs had the idea: if it is impossible to overtake in Monte Carlo, let's force 2 pit stops to create strategy variation. In practice it delivered the opposite of what was promised. With huge, wide cars, nobody wanted to pit at the wrong time and come back out stuck in a train. The result was the extreme version of something that was already bad: deliberately slow pace, drivers backing up entire packs, everyone calculating every tenth not to open an undercut window. One fan nailed the dilemma a lot of people feel. They still love Monaco, qualifying, the millimetric risk by the guardrail. But they admit that, in the race, a car 5 seconds slower ahead is almost impossible to pass. That is where a first strong pattern appears. Whenever F1's leadership tries to manufacture a show with artificial rules, like mandatory 2-stop races, the risk of killing the Grand Prix is huge. And that will come back when we talk about sprints. Before that, let's go to the part of the season where F1 reminded everyone why it is still the #1 series. Mexico. Turn 1, the start, 3 or 4 lines into the corner. Everybody with 2021 fresh in their minds, and of course, Hamilton and Verstappen meet again. Contact, controversy, a spark of a rivalry that seemed dormant. Meanwhile, around the rest of the lap, you had exactly the package fans love: 3 different strategies working, the field spread in groups, overtakes happening in more than one part of the track. And then there is the human side. Oliver Behrman, a kid, delivering a 4th place nobody expected. Veterans making mistakes, drivers getting penalized for cutting corners. A hot debate about consistency in the stewards' room. What is interesting is that many people agreed Hamilton should be penalized, but not with the fact that others appeared to do something similar and walked away with nothing. The race itself was great, but it leaves the track with an asterisk. The stewards almost stole the show. Keep that point in mind. Right after that, Interlagos. A dry race, no magic rain save, and still considered by many people as the ceiling for how good a dry race can be today. Incredibly tight field, multiple racing lines, DRS a bit too strong, sure, but at least allowing a faster car to actually get through. Norris wins with a bit of a cushion at the end, which took some tension away from the fight for the victory, but the rest of the story makes up for it. Antonelli scores the best result of his career, second place. Verstappen starts from the pit lane and claws his way back to the podium. Multiple strategies coexist without any single obvious, right answer. At Interlagos you can clearly see what separates a procession from a race. Even if there is no fight for the lead, if the field stays close and the car behind can close in and actually try something, it feels alive. Add to that strong parallel storylines, the rookie shining, the champion recovering, and there you have it. A Grand Prix that sticks in your memory. And then comes the peak of the year, Silverstone. The 2025 British Grand Prix had practically every ingredient fans say they value. Changing rain, a drying track, safety cars coming out at moments that broke the rhythm, superstar drivers making big mistakes, Verstappen spinning, Hamilton dropping out of podium contention with an off, Norris living out a kind of home race redemption, and, at the heart of it, Nico Hulkenberg finally, after more than a decade, getting that long-awaited podium. One perfect detail. A lot of people felt it was written in the stars that Hamilton would catch Hulkenberg at the end. Then the combination of that final tire stop, track conditions, and Hamilton's own mistake kills that storyline. You don't even need to be a fan of either driver to feel the drama. There is controversy over penalties again. A 10-second sanction seen as excessive by many in a key incident. There are too many safety cars in some people's eyes. But even with all those flaws, Silverstone stands out as the absolute high point of the season. Look at the pattern that repeats in the good races. Variable weather, real strategic variety, drivers having room to attack, and clear human narratives. It is not overtakes for the sake of overtakes. You remember Verstappen starting from the pit lane in Brazil. You remember Behrman in Mexico. You remember Hulkenberg in Silverstone. You remember Antonelli in Interlagos. That is what builds mythology. Now let's cross over to the other side. Because it is the contrast with the worst races that really shows what is broken. We already talked about Japan and Monaco. Classic examples of ultra-modern cars on old-school tracks. But the real Achilles heel of 2025 was the sprint format. On paper the promise is beautiful. A short race, no tire nursing, no fear about long-run wear, just pure attack. In reality, some of the worst experiences of the year happened in the sprints. Starting with Spa. A Belgian sprint race on that layout, with Eau Rouge, Kemmel, a big braking zone into Les Combes. Sounds like a guaranteed mini-festival of late braking dives. What did we get? Norris passed Leclerc on lap 3. And from that moment until the checkered flag there was not a single change of position among the top 14. 0. The drivers slip into this mindset. Low points, high risk, everyone extremely close in performance. The calculation is simple. Why would I risk a dive bomb in a short race if tomorrow we have the real Grand Prix? That is devastating for the sprint concept. If the race that is supposed to be a concentrated shot of action turns into a processional warm-up, the format loses its meaning. In Austin, in the United States, the sprint still manages to fall apart in a completely different way. Right at the start there is a crash that wipes out 4 cars, including 2 title contenders. Several laps behind the safety car to clean it all up. When we finally get back to green, Ocon and Stroll collide, another neutralization. The actual green flag running ends up so short that some fans said they watched the whole thing basically on fast forward, because the content boiled down to 2 safety cars and not much else. Notice how here, unlike Spa, the problem is not a lack of risk. There are crashes, there is contact, but the format does not forgive. Any incident eats up a huge chunk of a race that is already short. The overall feeling is simply, what a waste. And then we get to the total disaster in Lusail. The 2025 Qatar Sprint is almost a lab experiment in dead racing. Among the top 16 there is only one meaningful overtake all race long, Antonelli passing Alonso on lap 12. After that, nothing. Nobody. The field just freezes. For a format that is supposed to be pure adrenaline, it feels almost like provocation. Some fans even brought up memories of that non-Grand Prix at Spa in 2021, when the cars did 2 laps behind the safety car and they still called it a race. The irony is harsh, but the message is clear. If a real race starts getting compared to a day where there was basically no racing at all, something is very wrong. Here the negative patterns are the mirror image of the good races. Cars that cannot follow closely. Drivers discouraged from taking risks. A race that is too short to recover from a safety car or a VSC. And no extra storytelling layer. No crazy weather. No underdog story. No epic comeback. Just more of the same, in short form. In the middle of all this there is one more corrosive detail. The feeling of unfair or inconsistent penalties. In Mexico, most people agree Hamilton had to be penalized for cutting the corner and gaining time. The problem is seeing others doing something very similar and walking away clean. In Brazil and Silverstone, the penalties handed to Piastri are seen by many as too harsh. That does not automatically turn a good race into a bad one, but it always leaves that aftertaste of, the result was decided in the office, not just on track. Put everything together and you can draw a very clear map of what the average fan is telling F1 in 2025. Positive messages. A good race is not just about fast cars. It is about human error, uncertain weather, multiple storylines at the same time. Tracks that allow more than one racing line, like Interlagos, Melbourne, and Silverstone, remain absolute gold. And when the rule makers let unpredictability appear organically, the series shines. Red flags. Sprint races, in their current form, do not deliver on the promise. On many circuits they just concentrate the problem instead of concentrating the action. Artificial rules like mandatory 2 stops tend to kill, not save, races on tight tracks. Aerodynamic development is pushing F1 back into a dangerous zone at circuits like Suzuka and Monaco. And stewards' inconsistency has become part of the narrative of the races, which is never a good sign. Now we get into the speculative but well-grounded part. What do these signals suggest F1 should do if it wants more Silverstone, Australia, and Brazil-style Grand Prix, and fewer Suzuka or Monaco processions and zombie sprints like Qatar and Spa? A few points are obvious. Rethink where you put sprint races. Dropping a short race on a circuit where overtaking is hard, or that is extremely dependent on downforce, is asking for trouble. If you want to keep sprints, you need to ramp up the reward for taking risks. More points, maybe a partially reversed grid. Maybe a format with a mandatory pit stop to open a strategic window. As things stand, any sensible driver plays it safe. Instead of inventing artificial rules for Monaco, the priority should be matching car design to the circuits. If a modern F1 car is simply too big to overtake there, then either the car has to change, or the purpose of Sunday in Monaco has to be honestly rethought. And maybe the most uncomfortable point internally, use this kind of ranking as a live barometer for the rulebook. If every race with rain and unpredictability spikes in approval, it probably means the technical package is too restrictive when conditions are stable. In the end, the revelation is simple but powerful. The F1 fan in 2025 is not asking for fake circus tricks. They do not want random safety cars just to bunch the field, or convoluted pit stop gimmicks. What this map of best and worst races shows is something else. Fans want cars that can genuinely race each other, weather and strategy creating real doubt, and enough room for human stories, from Norris to Hulkenberg, from Antonelli to Behrman, from Hamilton to Verstappen, to actually unfold on track. As long as F1 insists on formats that punish risk, overprotect predictability, and shove the stewards into the spotlight, we will keep having years that feel like 2 seasons in one. One thrilling season of Grand Prix like Silverstone and Interlagos, and another sleepy one, made of empty sprints and technical processions. If you want to be on the good side of the season, understanding why some races work and others flop, subscribe to F1 Revealed. Here we do not just react to what happened on Sunday. The whole idea is to connect these dots that, in isolation, look like random, good and bad races, but together shove it right in F1's face. This is the kind of show fans are actually willing to cheer for.